Good morning, H9. I hope you guys had a fabulous weekend. I personally was able to finish a puzzle. Yes. Zoom conference with my family. In fact, we are doing this new thing where we are creating trivia games. So that was really fun. I hope you guys were able to do something fun and new. If you want recommendations, seriously try doing trivia nights with your family. It was really, really enjoyable. Anyways, I first, before I do anything else, want to thank you profusely. I was so unbelievably impressed by the work that you guys turned in last week. The note takers were detailed, specific, and super well done. And I also was impressed by your timeline events as well as your discussion posts. It was obvious reading through those that you know your stuff. And even though distance learning is still a thing, I'm so proud of all of you for actually understanding, trying to work through this content, and doing a phenomenal job. As a teacher, I tell you guys all the time that the biggest and most important thing that I can see is teaching you and working with you so that you really understand Northwood's core values and are becoming these amazing humans. And last week, man, you guys showed integrity in all of the assignments that you completed. You guys showed mutual respect in your discussion posts, and you showed compassion by giving me patience. And I know this has been somewhat confusing in realms, but the way that you word your emails to me and your questions, I can tell that you are being really patient with me and understanding me. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Keep up the fantastic work. I've been bragging about you guys all year to all the other H9 teachers. And honestly, I'm still bragging about you guys. We have our weekly meetings we have a couple bi-weekly meetings, And every time I'm like, my period 3 and period 6 are doing awesome on distance learning. That said, if you are struggling, right, take it 1 week at a time. Maybe last week was really great and this week's going to be a struggle. If that is the case, now is not the time to suffer in silence. Shoot me an email. Talk to me. Let me know you are struggling. This is going to be an uphill battle. This is going to be difficult if you decide to keep your struggles to yourself. Now, those struggles can be you lacking motivation. However, those struggles can be very real as well in the sense that maybe you're struggling with the technology. Maybe a family member is sick. Maybe your parents are working nonstop because they're doctors or, have essential jobs. So please let me know if that's you. I'd love to offer more support. Anyways, today, is, let's find the date, the 13th. You have 2 things that are due tomorrow by 8 p.m. First is the note taker for the lecture that, of course, I'm going to upload once I'm done recording it. And second is that you guys are going to be making a propaganda poster of your own, like this. It'll either be online or you can draw it by hand. The instructions are here, and I'll talk about it again at the end of the lecture so it makes more sense. Notice that you have to upload your note taker, but it does not have to be mine. If you rather take notes on a separate piece of paper, by all means, you absolutely can. So let me let you know what you're doing next week as well. Next class, on Wednesday, you're going to be working a little bit more on understanding the soldier experience. So you are going to have to read a letter from a man named Arthur. And Arthur is a real person. Oh, I'm sorry. He's writing to Arthur. His name is Thomas. Thomas is a real person. He is a British soldier who is actually fighting during World War I. This is a real letter. You are going to read his letter. You're going to answer some comprehension questions. Feel free to bullet point. And then the part that's really important is you are going to write Arthur You are going to write as if you are Arthur. So you're going to write to Thomas. And the must-haves is that it has to be about 2 paragraphs long. You have to address one of his specific struggles. So just like how you would if you're reading a letter, you don't just want to talk about yourself. You want to talk about the things that the person has written to you. And lastly, you are going to provide some details of your daily life to kind of help him take his mind off the war. And then the final part is that you are going to design a care package. Thomas is struggling, and you are going to give him a care package of at least 5 items. And you can write or draw the item here, and then you're going to create a little justification as why you are putting that in your box. Now, be realistic. You can't put a shower in a care package. You can't put a puppy in a care package. Do you want Thomas to open a package with a dead puppy inside? No, that would be awful. So you're going to try and find items that could fit within like an actual care package box, and give me a reason why you decided to put that in there. Was there something in the letter that made you think of this specific item? Or are you just trying to empathize with Thomas? And if you were on the front, you would want a box of chocolates, right? Something like that. Anyway, so that is for Wednesday, and it is due Thursday by 8 p.m. So go ahead and take out your note takers. Take out my note taker if that's what you would prefer. And let's talk about the new face of war and how the Industrial Revolution transforms the face of war. So there are a couple of times throughout human history where what it means to be in war changes drastically. War changes drastically in World War I, and in H10, you'll learn how war changes drastically for World War II. And one of the reasons why World War I has such a massive difference is because of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution makes things possible in the realm of transportation, communication, and weapons that forever changes what war really means and what war really looks like. And it's all of these changes that lead people to be shocked about the devastation of World War I. Of course, wars are not new in global history, but following World War I, humanity is blown away by the destruction that they have caused. So, for us to really understand this, though, we need to understand, what the 19th century really looks like, the 1800s. This is a pivotal time in global history because we start to see a transformation from the medieval world into the modern world with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, which of course we learned a couple of units ago, so I'm sure you remember everything about it. A couple of things I want you to remember is that first, during this time period, Paris is the capital of the world. And the reason for this is because of Napoleon I and Napoleon III. And when I say capital of the world, I mean technologically, culturally, food-wise, fashion-wise. The rest of the world is really looking at Paris and at France in general as kind of this powerhouse. Now, of course, we know that England also has a strong economy and a massive navy, but France becomes culturally dominating for its fashion and for its way of life. The Industrial Revolution brings exponential change. So it's not change that's happening like a gradual slope, but we see change skyrocket, and technologies literally change overnight. However, us humans, we are slower to change. So during this time period, there's this weird juxtaposition of like modern technology and a modern city mixed with traditional old school values. And these things don't necessarily mix really well together. And that's exactly what happens during World War I. We see modern technology in weaponry, but we see old school ways of fighting war. And modern armament, weapons, with old school battle tactics is going to lead to devastation. And so your question for this entire unit is really, why is World War I so different? What about World War I changes the face of warfare? And the first thing I want you to understand and remember is that in the past, wars were fought by people who were in the upper classes, middle classes and upper classes. Think about feudalism, right? And we start to see, think about feudalism and who is fighting in the war. In that feudalism pyramid, we see it's the upper classes that are fighting in this war. And because of this, war is romanticized. People see war as this glorious, heroic rite of passage. And in a way, during this time period, it is. Because war was a way for families to move up in their family status, which during feudalism and during rugged social hierarchies, moving up in status was extremely difficult. And war and fighting in battles was one of the few ways for you to actually do that. So you see uniforms such as these, which show these gentlemen in brightly colored clothing fighting for their country. However, this does not stay the norm. This changes drastically with Napoleon. And the reason why it changes with Napoleon is because Napoleon changes who fights in wars. Napoleon goes beyond using an army of just elites. Napoleon starts what is known as a conscription, which is when every single one of his citizens, needs to have military service. And the reason why this is so different is for a couple of reasons. One, lower classes were not seen as good enough, elite enough to fight in the wars. Two, well, what happens during a time of peace? Do you still need to join the war? And lastly, a lot of wars back then were hired militaries. So you wouldn't require your own citizens to fight. You would hire other people's citizens to fight. But Napoleon changes all of that with this conscription. And because of that, he has the world's largest standing army. A standing army is an army that is ready for battle in a day's notice. Napoleon doesn't need months gathering soldiers to join his armies and his navy. No, they're already gathered. They're already good to go because of the conscription. Because everybody needs to be joining military service, he has a military that is massive. It is so massive, in fact, that one of the things that he was heard saying is, "You can't stop me. I can afford to lose 30,000 men per month." This was a huge shift in mindset because before Napoleon, people could not lose a single soldier. There just weren't enough mercenaries. There weren't enough elites to actually have in the army. But Napoleon changes that because he says, doesn't matter your class, you're in my military. A couple of other differences that I want us to understand is that during the 19th century, war is fought on a much smaller scale. It's fought on a smaller scale in every sense of the word. The militaries are smaller, the battlefields are smaller, the weapons are smaller, the leadership is smaller. And a big part of the reason why war is fought on a smaller scale is because, again, it was seen as a role for the elites. Mercenaries, hired armies, mercenary is a hired army, were used. So people weren't fighting for a patriotic reason. People were fighting for money. On top of that, transportation before the Industrial Revolution is very difficult. Railroad lines are non-existent if they're even present, and roads themselves are crudely built, so it's difficult to move around them. So That meant that where battles took place was very limited, because where a battle could take place had to be where your army could get to. On top of that, in that same vein of the limited transportation, is that horse riding was the primary and the fastest way to get militaries from one place to the other. And of course, there was not enough horses for every single soldier. So most people just walked, which meant it could take months, weeks to get to your battle's destination. So preparing for battle took a lot longer, which meant, of course, that the battle was going to be smaller for multiple reasons. And lastly, weapons pre-industrial revolution were hard to make, so they were limited themselves. There just weren't that many bullets. There just weren't that many muskets. There just weren't that many knives. And on top of that, the weapons that they did have, the guns that they had, were not very accurate. And so, although there is a lot of gruesome battles, there's a lot of death before World War I. It's not like it invented tragedy at all. The scale of it is much smaller in the 19th century. But we start to see that changing. Because once World War I begins, it's not the war that people expected. Right when World War I started, every country on all sides thought, this is going to be quick. This is going to be really easy. Germany especially was expecting, boom, we'll take out France, then we'll turn our attention to Russia, we'll take out all of Russia, we'll be done in a couple of months, people. This is going to be the shortest war. Let's go for it. However, within the first couple of weeks, people realized this quick war that was anticipated, this easy romanticized victory, is very different. And the best example that I could think of is the First Battle of the Marne, which happens following the invasion of Belgium for 5 days, people, September 7th to September 12th, 1914. And the reason why this war is so significant is because this war really signifies, one, the extremely high death toll of World War I, as well as the stalemate on the Western Front. Now, we all remember from last week that Germany was hoping to only have to fight on one front at a time. Take out France, go to Germany. However, that plan fails. And now it means that World War I is a two-front war. And those fronts are known as the Western Front and the Eastern Front. The Western Front is fought along France, and the Eastern Front is fought along Russia. The Western Front and the Eastern Front both deal with a lot of stalemates. A stalemate is when there's no clear victor. So there might be a couple of victories for Germany and then a couple of victories for France. There isn't really a domination from either side. And a reason for that is because Germany had to split their army. Couple of people, or a big portion went to France and a big portion went to Germany, or went to Russia, excuse me. But their entire force was never united. And the Battle of the Marne has an estimated 300,000 casualties in 5 days. Napoleon was bragging about losing 30,000 men a month. And in 5 days, 300,000 casualties. In case you're trying to understand how large that number is, that's about the size of the city of Irvine. In 5 days, the entire city of Irvine. And so people realize rather quickly that this isn't the war they anticipated. This isn't the 19th century war that people are used to. Something seems similar, but the weaponry, the transportation, the Industrial Revolution makes it so that this isn't going to be small scale. Battles can happen anywhere. Battles happen a lot faster. And those weapons are a lot more accurate. And those weapons are a lot easier to make. And so by December, it is painfully obvious that this isn't going to be the quick and easy war that was anticipated. And this is when we start to see a rise in dehumanization. Now, I want you to pause right here. And on your piece of paper, I want you to answer those 3 questions. What do you think dehumanization means? What is the purpose to dehumanize? And what are examples? These can be modern examples. This can be examples you think of in World War I. Pause. Okay, so if you didn't pause the first time, pause now. All right, if you didn't pause the third time, please pause. Okay, if you paused, thanks. I appreciate it. If you didn't pause, there's no way of me to know. So, but I know in my heart. Anyways, so to dehumanize means when you take away somebody's human characteristics, you take away what makes them human, what makes them unique, what makes them relatable. So the purpose to dehumanize, there's multiple purposes, but specifically during times of war, is to make it easier to harm another human being. I personally believe that it is not in human nature to be cruel and mean and to want to kill. However, during war, it is a part of your duty to take another person's life. At times, it can be for self-defense. At times, it's for the defense of your country. And I'd first like to say that I pretty much obviously have never been to war. Now, I can try as hard as I can to empathize and put myself in those shoes, but the reality is, until you have been to war, you don't know what war is like. However, from reading various sources and talking to people who have been to war, I've learned that dehumanizing is a common thing that soldiers face. It's a lot easier to pull the trigger if you think of them as the devil. It's a lot easier to pull the trigger if you think of them as evil. If you think of them as out to get your family. If you see them as a monster. You don't want to know their name. You don't want to know their family background. You don't want to know their values, the traditions, the things that bring them joy. Because that's too real. That makes it really difficult to pull the trigger. And so we see both sides using dehumanization tactics like the picture that's on this lecture to make it seem like the enemy is the devil. The enemy is out to get you. Now, of course, there are examples during times of war like propaganda, but there are modern examples as well, like in prison systems, being given a number instead of a name, or having to shave off your hair instead of having your own unique style or color. It's also, we all know that I love murder mystery podcasts. We all know this. And it's one of the things that they recommend you do if you are ever face to face with somebody who's going to harm you. You remind them that you are human. And what I mean is that you don't say, "Stop, I'm human," but you remind them of those relatable things. This is my name. These are the people who love me. These are the things that I like to do. Because research shows that if you remind somebody about those things that seem similar, relatable things, people can relate to having parents. People can relate to having joy on your birthday or a holiday, that it makes it harder for people to harm you. And so we see this dehumanization, especially in propaganda and especially in the messages that are spread throughout the military. Again, because it's easier to kill a monster, a devil, or an evil human, instead of seeing them as a father, a son, or a brother. And the question then that I ask you is, once you dehumanize, can you stop? And I think this question is a gray one. It's one that isn't black and white. And I believe that there is hope, right? That once you dehumanize, that doesn't mean that you will forever see certain people as monsters or devil or evil. And my example to give you hope with that happens on Christmas of 1914. Because on Christmas 1914, the war has been going on now for about 5-ish months. And Pope Benedict at the time pleads both sides to have a truce. A truce is not to end the war, it's just to pause. Just no fighting for a short period of time. Pause. And he specifically says that the guns may fall silent at least upon the night the angels sang. That's what he asks. And both sides rebuff. They ignore really what he's saying. They're like, no, dude, hundreds of thousands of people have died. We understand that is heartbreaking and sad, but we also understand that means we can't just stop for Christmas. However, some soldiers really want to stop. In fact, already within those first 5 months, there are instances of fraternization. This is when there are peaceful interactions between opposing sides. So like a Frenchman and a Germanman sharing a pint of beer is an example of fraternization. And this happens all across the Western Front. Now, it's not super common. I don't want you to think that like every day people are meeting new people. Hi, you're Germans, pleasure. But it happens enough that there are actual like rules against fraternization. They're like, you have to stop befriending the enemy. Okay, we're working on dehumanization here. If you go grab a beer with him, that doesn't feel like dehumanization anymore. But what we do see happen in certain places, not throughout everywhere, but in certain places, on Christmas Eve, soldiers begin decorating their trenches with candles and trees. In fact, they start to put things on the trees so that it's like ornaments on a Christmas tree. And the Germans, there are stories of the Germans singing Christmas carols. And the British responding back by belting Christmas carols across the way. So I want you to picture this. World War I, especially on the Western Front, was fought in a style known as trench warfare. And this is when there is one trench, which is like a deep tunnel in the ground, against another trench, a deep tunnel in the ground. And in between, it's just flat land, totally visible. And so we have the soldiers in both trenches singing back and forth to each other, their voices carrying over no man's land, that land between the trenches. And in fact, both sides not only start to sing, but they actually yell greetings at each other. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, to their enemy, to that evil monster. And it gets so friendly in some areas that some soldiers actually start to hop out of their trenches and go across no man's land. Now, the reason why that's so crazy is because hours before, if you had done that, you would have been shot dead. No man's land is the most dangerous place to be in the battle because there's nowhere to hide. You're completely vulnerable. And so people pop their heads out, where only moments before, that would have been the instance to get shot in the head. And now people are standing up and walking across no man's land to their enemies. And so we start to hear stories like this. Friday, Christmas Day, we are having the most extraordinary Christmas Day imaginable. a sort of unarranged and quite unauthorized but perfectly understood and scrupulously observed truce exists between us and our friends in the front. The funny thing is, it only seems to exist in this part of the battle line. On our right and left, we can hear all of them firing away as cheerfully as ever. The thing started last night, a bitter cold night with right frost. Soon after dusk, when the Germans started shouting Merry Christmas, Englishmen, to us. Of course, our fellows shouted back, and presently large numbers of both sides have left their trenches unarmed and met in the debatable, shot-riddled no man's land between the lines. Here, the agreement, all on their own, came to be made that we should not fire at each other until midnight tonight. The men were all fraternizing in the middle. We naturally did not allow them too close to our line, and swapped cigarettes and lies in the utmost good fellowship. Not a shot was fired all night. Captain Robert Patrick. And there were a couple of places along the front where we see this makeshift Christmas truce. This is not a truce that was organized by the leadership. It was organized by the men fighting, who took a step from dehumanizing their enemy and saw them as friends, saw them as people to share stories and cigarettes with. Here's another one. Go ahead and pause right here so that you can read it. And so the reason why I bring this up is because while World War I is a war like no other, with devastation that unfortunately will only increase in the coming years, and while dehumanization is, some would argue, a part of war, it is not permanent. It is not a part that people want to be in. And when given the chance, these types of reconciliation can happen. Now, the Christmas truce only happens in Christmas 1914. There are no stories in the next years upcoming in the war. But it is a real part of World War I that I hope can bring some kind of uplifting message that it doesn't all have to be sad and terrible and dark, that there is a possibility to have some reconciliation even to your enemies. And I also want to leave you with the message that while dehumanization can be seen as a natural and must have important part of the war, dehumanization when you're not in war, dehumanization when you're walking around in society and you may dehumanize a race or an ethnic group or immigrants or a gender, that type of dehumanization is the type that you should stop, is the type that you should remember, and the type that you should remind the people around you. And do exactly what these men did. Remind them of your shared values, remind them of your shared experience, remind them of your shared celebrations and traditions. Because it's a lot harder to hate someone when you realize that you both want to celebrate Christmas. And so with that, I lead you to the final part of today's assignment, which is to create a propaganda poster from a specific country. Now, if you are doing the journal, the extra credit journal, you can use this propaganda as something to add to your journal. But if you're not doing it, then you can just do it from any country you want. However, it should be an obvious country. Other must-haves is that it has a clear purpose. So it shouldn't just be like, World War I is terrible. You know, it should be something like, help the Red Cross, buy war bonds, join the military, ration your food, having a clear purpose. It should connect to a historical term, for example, like an increase in nationalism. It should be colored, it should be on printer paper, or you guys can obviously do an online version, and do not copy it from online. So I have a couple of examples that I wanted to show you. So this is a person who did theirs by hand. You're allowed to do yours by hand. This is a person who also did theirs by hand. This is a person who did theirs by hand and online. So they printed the flag, but then they drew the soldiers in the background. And then this is a picture of somebody just doing it completely online. If you do it online, feel free to use Canva or another resource. However, you can absolutely draw it by hand and just send me a picture or a photocopy, or a scan, excuse me, of the propaganda poster that you drew. Other than that, you guys, I have nothing else for you. Have a fantastic Monday. Remember that these things are due on Tuesday by 8 p.m. I miss you all, and I'll see you later.